Uh, Thank you very much for inviting me to serve the easy job of the day, which is the moderator of this session. The title of this session, may I sit down or is the panelist able to see me? Oh, sorry, I forgot to remove a very important gear here.
Good.
Okay, so maybe I will
Yeah,
sit
you
down.
can see,
Okay.
and the panelist is on the screen over here.
Okay. Well, good morning and also good afternoon and good evening to all the panelists today. I understand that we are all joining this session from 5 different time zones. Charles from New Zealand is in the afternoon. Hugh, you are in early evening. And Honorable Matsukawa is 1 hour ahead of Taipei time, so good morning. So thank you very much. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have to organize this year's forum in a low-touch fashion. So the dialogue continues, but we are not physically in the same space. But I don't think that prevents us to have a fruitful discussion in the next 90 minutes. So to begin with, I would like to start by testing to ensure that all the panelists are with us. We can see you now, but I want to make sure that we can also hear you. So I'll very briefly invite our 3 panelists to say hello to the audience. The first panelist is Honorable Rui Matsukawa, member of the House of the Counselor of Japan. Can you say hello to the audience?
Yes, hello, everyone. Really much. It's a great honor to be here, and I'm really happy to be in this great seminar. Thank you.
Honorable, you heard wonderful. So we heard you wonderfully.
Okay.
So no problem. Our next panelist is Hugh Stevens from Canada. Hugh, can you say a few words to the audience as well?
Yes, hello everybody. 大家好.
Oh, 你好, thank you. And also Charles Finning from New Zealand. Charles, can you say hello?
Hello from New Zealand and 大家好.
Fantastic. So we're going to undertake this session in Chinese then. No, I'm joking. So let's come back to English. And also Francisco de Rosenvik from Mexico is still, he will be with us shortly, but we will carry on the session for the time being. Now, the title of this session is the challenge and the prospect of the CPTPP in a changing global economy. So there are 3 words for this session. And I think the most important keywords for this session is actually not CPTPP, not challenge and prospect, but a changing global economy. When the CPTPP starts its negotiation, the World Economic Order is still in the good old days. There's no trade war, there's no technology rivalry, there's no COVID-19. But when the 11 CPTPP members conclude and sign the agreement in came into force in late 2018, early 2019, we are already in the first phase of the trade war. And things get escalating over time. Now we are moving beyond tariff war, but entering, for example, technology rivalries, and also digital war. Look at the ban on TikTok and WeChat. And then it comes COVID-19 pandemic. In the first session, we have already heard some summaries of the economic impact of the COVID-19, and with the pandemic is still not fully under control, and vaccination is not really commercially available. We are looking at economic situation, a recession that is entering perhaps the first half of 2021. And we are actually experiencing one of the deepest global economic recession in the last 150 years. So the keywords in my order is actually the CPTPP in a changing global order. But there are challenges, but there are also prospects. CPTPP is probably the most important regional integration undertaking in the Asia-Pacific region. It serves perhaps a very ideal platform for putting things back together. And that's probably three of the key messages that we are learning from our panelists today. And Francisco, you are with us. Can you say something to the audience? Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning in Taipei. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you for your kind invitation, and definitely CPTPP's landmark trade initiative. So I'm very happy and excited to be part of this panel.
Thank you very much. Now, let me waste no time and let's start the session by inviting the Honorable Rui Matsukawa to share with us her views on the role, the challenge, and the prospect of CPTPP. The Honorable Matsukawa has been serving in the Foreign Service, Japanese Foreign Service for more than 20 years. For one role, she has been the Deputy Director General of the Japan-China-Korea Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat. And after leaving the Foreign Service, he was elected as the member of the upper house, the member of the Council of Japan back in 2016. And she is a keen supporter of the CPTPP. So Honorable Matsuyama, you will have the floor for 12 to 15 minutes.
Thank you.
you.
You can call me Rui. It's a bit long to call Matsukawa, so it's okay to call me Rui. And anyway, thank you very much for the floor. And again, I'm really happy to be here. Actually, Taiwan is a very special country, special place for me. Presently, my husband, so Herman 男朋友，我最去旅行的地方是台湾。So, without the ado, I go into the detail. I think Taiwan CPTPP is very important framework now after with Corona time, because there are a couple of reasons. But I think the most important reason is that everybody, I mean the world, the countries, realized the importance of the supply chains. Has to be safe. Before Corona time, I think the globalization was a standard. Company tried to establish a supply chain to produce more, cheaper, and regardless of the place. But I think in Japan too, we have realized that the dependency on China is really a risky business. And like mask or the pharmaceutical or like food or maybe energy, I think important essential products or has to be produced within yourself. I mean, like in Japan. Or if it's not possible, it's better to be produced in the network of supply chain of the countries where you can trust. So that is I think the TPP plays very important with a new highlight in this with Corona or after Corona world. TPP, as you know, is composed of the member countries that are committed to the liberalization and rule of law, and with very high transparency of the standards, not only in the products, but also goods and services both, plus the intellectual property rights, and also like a digital platform. So in many ways, TPP is a very advanced platform for the nations and the areas also that are committed to a high standard and a high transparency. So in short, with constructing a supply chain of where you can trust, TPP is very important. And I think Taiwan is an eligible area for this TPP, and very much welcome. I do support Taiwan become a member of TPP. And not only that, I think the TPP membership is like a maritime friendly alliance in a way. If you count the nations, the countries members are placed around the Pacific Oceans and are committed to the rule of freedom of navigation and all that. So I think in a way, TPP is, of course, it's an economic framework, but also can be a very good network of political, strategic interest. And that is my conclusion, very short conclusion. But before, to make it a little bit more understandable, I would like to explain backgrounds of my thoughts. I think COVID-19 has accelerated already changes that had already occurred before. Namely, one is the U.S.-China Cold War, in a way, that struggle for the hegemonic power. And then with that backgrounds, I think the international legal order is receding while the power politics logic becomes more prevalent. And then the digitalization is becoming much more important than before because people don't want to move around to get the risk of infection. So these are the things that I think the coronavirus has accelerated. And then supply chain network is something that I think are new in a way, realized by the COVID-19. But I think many things, because of the coronavirus, I think the changes that the world had faced has accelerated. And then again, coming back to the point that network of members that you can trust in many ways in business, like business-wise, strategic-wise. You don't want to face a situation when, you're expecting this supply, but you cannot, this can be cut off by very different political reasons by some countries. So these things, again, coming back to my first point, the TPP has become very important. And Taiwan is very eligible in terms of the very transparent country. Can be a transparent member with high digital technology and also democratic, free society. So I think we should, in many ways, welcome Taiwan into this TPP. And I think, and because CPTPP is just like WTO, is a network of countries and economic areas. So I think with many political sensitivities, just like Taiwan being a member of the WTO, Taiwan can be the economic zone in APEC and all that. I think it's we can figure out some ways to include Taiwan in a suitable way to TPP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rui, if I may. I think you addressed one of the key message of this session, that is the changing world and the implication for CPTPP. And I fully agree with you that I think the value of CPTPP will become increasingly important in light of the COVID-19 and the trade war. When everybody's talking about supply network resilience and other initiatives. So probably the value of CPTPP goes beyond just free trade network. It's more than binding things, everybody together and rebuild a resilient network in the future. But I would like to invite our second speaker of this session, Hugh Stevens. Hugh is now a distinguished fellow of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada and also serving as the vice chair of the Canadian PAC. So Hugh is a veteran in regional integration and cooperation in the Asia Pacific region. And formerly, Mr. Stevens has been the Canadian representative in Taiwan between 1995 and 1998, so he knows Taiwan as well. So Hugh, you will have the floor for 12 to 15 minutes, please. Sorry, Hugh, can you hear me? Can you just thumbs up to indicate you hear me?
Sorry, how's that?
Okay, yeah, you are back. You're with us now. Good.
Okay,
Good now.
thank you. Somebody, I think, is going to put up some slides that I can use as kind of teaching aids or backdrop to my talk. So if whoever's doing that can put up the first slide. In the meantime, we'll launch into it. So first of all, I want to thank the conference organizers, of course, for inviting me. I'm delighted to be back in Taiwan in a virtual sense. And I want to congratulate the Taiwan government for its efforts in control of COVID-19. Certainly, it's been a remarkable and a very successful effort. COVID-19, in fact, is one more reason why this topic of the CPTPP is so important, as our first speaker just noted. Now, I'm going to offer what I would call a Canadian perspective on this subject. So just leave that slide up, please. I'll come to that slide in a second. I'm delighted to offer a Canadian perspective on this subject, but in fact, it's a perspective from a Canadian practitioner, as was pointed out. I've had some 40 years experience in the region. I do not profess to speak for the Canadian government, but I hope that I can, in fact, offer you a perspective from this part of the world on this issue of the CPTPP and Taiwan. Now, just a brief word, perhaps some basic facts. As we recall, the agreement entered into force on the 20th of December 2018 for 6 of the 11 signatories who had completed ratification at that time: Australia, Canada, Japan, Mexico, New Zealand, and Singapore. And I know that Canada, go back to the previous slide, please. I know that the Canadian government really put its foot on the accelerator to try and get that agreement completed by December. And in fact, it was a real bonus for the members, because not only did they get the benefits of joining of the agreement coming into accession in December, then on the 1st of January 2019, the benefits of the second year came into effect. I think it's fair to say that the CPTPP is a beacon of hope in a dark protectionist landscape. And along with the RCEP, which of course is yet to be signed, the CPTPP advances the trade and liberalization agenda at a time when protectionist measures by some major trading countries are threatening to undo decades of progress. Whoever's doing the slides, would you please go back to the first slide that you put up, because I want to talk to that in just a moment. The commitments and new disciplines, thank you, just leave that slide on. The commitments and new disciplines of the CPTPP are particularly important because of the malaise affecting the World Trade Organization, where the work of the appellate body, as we know, has now ground to a halt because of the actions of the United States primarily. But it also plays an important role in offsetting the US-China trade war now underway. And that's the slide I'd like to have a look at. That's on the screen in front of you. This slide, which is produced by Professors Petrie and Plummer, and has just been released a couple of months ago, they argue that the CTPPP and the RCEP combined could offset the trade losses of over $300 billion to 2030 caused by the US-China trade war. The chart, in fact, shows global income gains or losses to the year 2030 in billions of dollars. Now, as you can see, the losses from the US-China trade war, based on what we know today, and of course it could get worse, are estimated at over 300 billion. These losses are partially offset by the current CPTPP, assuming all 11 members ratify. Combined with the liberalizing effects of the RCEP, the losses are completely offset. And if we engage in a little bit of stargazing, some suppositions, we can see a much greater offset. One is, if China were to join the CPTPP, the gains would be very, very significant. This is, of course, it's also being a member of RCEP, and I'll come back to China a little bit later. The gains would double, and if we add 5 more countries, additional economies to the CPTPP, and in this case, the authors, Professors Petrie and Plummer, chose Korea, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and Taiwan as examples. The gains are increased even further. Now, Petrie and Plummer note that the RCEP and the CPTPP offer hope in a dangerous and divided world. They partly offset the damage of the US-China trade conflict, encourage cooperation in the Asia-Pacific, and suggest viable directions for the world trading system. As has already been mentioned, the CPTPP sets out high-level standards of trade and investment liberalization, focusing particularly on behind-the-border measures rather than traditional tariff reduction. I don't think I will go through the measures of the gold standard agreement that was achieved, of course, pre-COVID, but beyond simple trade reduction, of course, it deals with issues such as protection of the environment, IP, enforceable dispute settlement, trade-related technical cooperation, and so forth. In short, it is a high standard of aspiration and execution. In short, the agreement not only results in important commitments to reduce barriers to trade and investment, but it also recognizes the importance of trade facilitation and capacity building at the same time in ensuring the benefits of liberalized trade are sustainable, equitable, and inclusive. Three words that are very important to the APEC region and to PECC. Now, the slide states the obvious. Of the 11 countries, only 6, now 7, only 6 initially ratified, which was enough to bring the agreement into effect. Vietnam subsequently ratified, and there are still 4 of the founding 11 members of the original signatories who are still engaged in the ratification process. But of course, the original TPP 12 became the TPP 11 when the United States withdrew after signing, but before ratifying, when the Trump administration came into power, a step that, at least in my view, was a major foreign policy blunder. However, after the US withdrawal, Japan stepped in, provided some really good leadership, along with other countries, and the remaining TP partners came together to keep the gains that had been achieved. And with minor modification, suspending only some of the chapters that related particularly to the US, the TPP text was adopted. Now, because of its incomplete status, the first priority needs to be to ensure that Brunei, Chile, Malaysia, and Peru complete the ratification process. Unfortunately, internal political issues and disagreements, now worsened by the COVID crisis, have slowed down this implementation, but I hope that the demonstration effect of the benefits of the TPP will ensure that ratification proceeds in these countries. But beyond complete ratification from the original 11, expansion is very desirable. So if I could just go back, please, one slide. One, and then come forward. It's too bad I don't have a button on my own slides. One more. Thank you. Let's stop there. A number of countries have expressed interest in accession, and these include, perhaps somewhat surprisingly, the United Kingdom. It's now feeling somewhat alone in a post-Brexit world. Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines, Korea should have been on this chart, and Taiwan, and China. Most recently, China has expressed some interest in joining, although I must say I think there's some doubt as to how serious China's interest is, and of course, possibly the United States after November the 3rd going forward. Last year, Canada held public consultations on CPTPP expansion to get public input, and other countries, including Japan, Australia, New Zealand, have also spoken favorably of expansion. At its first meeting of the CPTPP Commission in 2019, the Commission adopted guidelines for expansion, which include setting out a process through an accession working party and benchmarks that aspirant economies must agree to meet. Next slide, please. So let's come to the core of the issue, Taiwan's candidacy, and I want to make 3 points. I think it's fair to say that the Taiwanese government has made no secret of its interest in accession. As a full member of the WTO, there is no reason why Taiwan not fully qualified to enter a regional trade pact under its WTO nomenclature if necessary. That regional pact would be fully consistent with Article 24 and be notified to the WTO. Japan, in particular, has been a strong supporter despite some bilateral disputes with Taiwan over agricultural products. Canada, now speaking for my own economy, has been officially non-committal, but has certainly not opposed Taiwan's participation. Now, a few years ago, when the CPTPP was under negotiation and Taiwan had expressed interest in joining the negotiations then underway amongst the original 12, I expressed cautious support for Taiwan's participation, but recommended that the initial stage of the agreement be completed first, and that, of course, has now happened, and noted that Taiwan needed to do a few things to get ready, notably to demonstrate the political will to make significant reforms to dismantle some entrenched trade barriers. That has now happened, and the preparatory work that has been underway in various agencies of the Taiwanese government to get ready for CPTPP negotiations has been impressive. Just as an aside, I note the recent announcement of removal of the ractopamine issue that has blocked U.S.-Taiwan trade negotiations, so in fact bilateral negotiations move forward. That's probably bad news for Canadian pork producers, since Canada has managed to figure out how to produce pork without ractopamine and has enjoyed a lot of success in the Taiwanese market as a result. Now let's talk about, so we've talked about no legal obstacle. Taiwan is ready economically and politically, and I'm convinced that's the case. So what about the elephant in the room, the China factor? You know, as much as it's unacceptable that one member of the WTO should seek to block another member from entering a regional trade pact, we're all aware of the unique historical and geographical circumstances that surround this heavily loaded question. Each member of the CPTPP may approach this question somewhat differently, but each will inevitably consider China's reaction as it makes its decision. This is reality. Now, as I mentioned, China has expressed some general interest recently in joining the CPTPP. This is not new. Is China ready to meet the dress code, as it's called? Probably not. Now, what about Canada? And how does the China factor affect Canada? Could you have the next slide, please? In the case of Canada, caution has always been the watchword when it comes to dealing with Taiwan and China. Since 1970, Canada has accepted that Beijing is, quote, the sole legal government of China. At the same time, at the time of diplomatic recognition of the PRC, Canada only took note of, did not acknowledge, did not accept China's assertion that Taiwan is an inalienable part of the territory of the People's Republic. This formula has allowed Canada, like many other countries, to maintain diplomatic relations with Beijing while at the same time developing economic and non-diplomatic relations with Taiwan. However, I must say that Canadian governments over the years have always been cautious, if not overly cautious, in developing this relationship, in my view. And the reason, of course, is because of concern that overly close relationships may damage prospect for closer economic ties with China. For example, there's no legal impediment preventing Canada from negotiating a free trade agreement with Taiwan, as New Zealand indeed has done. But there has been little appetite for such a move in Canada. This attitude, however, is now changing. Why? Well, first, accession by Taiwan to a plurilateral agreement is different from entering into bilateral trade negotiations. And second, Canada's relations with China are at an all-time low, as this slide will attest. Some of you will be pretty familiar with what's been happening. In December 2018, Canada arrested Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou in Vancouver on a U.S. Department of Justice warrant. A few days after her detention, China arrested and has now charged two Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, who are known as the two Michaels in Canada, with national security violations, as well as taking a number of retaliatory actions against Canadian imports. Canadians, I think it's fair to say, regard China's actions as hostage-taking, and according to the most recent polls, less than 14% of Canadians currently have a favorable view of China. Now, I can't tell you what's going to happen with regard to Ms. Meng. Her case is before the courts. She is on bail. She's living in her home in Vancouver. She has a highly paid legal team. She has every benefit of the rule of law, which I wish I could say was the same for the two Michaels. But what will happen will depend on the evidence and the court's decision. But in the meantime, Canada-China relations have never been worse. But I just want to stress that that fact is not a reason for Canada to encourage Taiwanese accession to the CPTPP. As I have commented elsewhere, Taiwanese accession should be pursued because it is in the interest of Canada and it's in the interest of the other members of the CPTPP and of the region to add to the strength of the organization by welcoming an economy like Taiwan that is an important global trader, a key player in global supply chains, and an economy that is willing and able to accept CPTPP disciplines. The fact that relations between Canada and China are poor simply removes what in the past might have been a constraining factor. So now to the last slide, please. I will wrap up. While COVID has cast a pall over the global economy, governments need to take steps now to address issues post-pandemic to lay out the foundations for economic recovery. The CPTPP Commission has just concluded its third meeting in Mexico, conducted virtually under Mexico's chairmanship, I should say. Its statement focused on the need to maintain cooperation and open supply chains in a time of COVID, especially with regard to trade in medicines and medical products, agriculture, and food supplies. Taiwan's handling of COVID has been exemplary. With regard to expansion, the Commission said, we support growing the value of the CPTPP through accession and warmly welcome the interest shown by several economies to accede to the agreement by showing their willingness to meet the agreement's high standards. This, of course, builds on the statement which you see on the screen issued by Prime Minister Abe at the first Commission meeting in January of 2019. Now, this statement that you see on the screen, the dress code, so-called, sounds like an invitation that Taiwan is more than capable of accepting. In my view, Taiwan is ready and willing to negotiate accession. The CPTPP needs to move forward, and accepting new members willing and able to meet its standards is the best way to do this. The conditions are ripe, and the timing is right. I must say, right now, we seem to be in a bit of a deadlock. No one wants to formally apply to join a club where the response may be no. And we must recall that all 11 current members must agree, even the 4 that have not yet ratified. At the same time, members of the club don't want to invite a potential member who may not be ready, who may refuse. So I think we need to break this impasse. The economies participating in the CPTPP should solicit firm expressions of interest from potential members by a fixed date, launch the negotiations through setting up an accession party negotiation, and get on with it. There is no time like the present. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hugh. You raised several interesting questions about, for example, China and the U.S. future participation in the CPTPP. And I think we're going to have a lot of discussions on that. But one thing is certain. First of all, Taiwan is 100%, my personal view, Taiwan is 100% like-minded country, sharing the same vision of the CPTPP. And as you mentioned in the presentation, we are also working with all the efforts to remove the obstacles, economic obstacles on bilateral basis to create the right condition to access to the consensus of the CPTPP members. So let's keep our fingers crossed for Taiwan's accession into the CPTPP. Let's move on to the next speaker, Mr. Charles Finney. Mr. Finney, or Charles, is now currently the chairperson of the New Zealand-Taiwan Business Council, and also a partner at the government relation consultancy Saunders Unsworth. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And Charles has been previously serving as a New Zealand head of mission in Taipei, and also, more importantly, the lead negotiator of the FTA between New Zealand and Taiwan. So again, once again, we have another veteran in regional integration who knows and also have personal experience in Taiwan. So Charles, you'll take the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. And again, thank you for the invitation to speak at this distinguished forum and on such a distinguished panel. The problem with speaking third after 2 excellent previous speakers is that pretty much everything that you wanted to say has been said. So I could just say I agree with Hugh and the Honourable Matsukawa. But let me just emphasise some points. First, indeed, we are facing extremely challenging global economic times. Many major economies are either in recession or heading into recession, and that is impacting international trade. So the correct response should be open supply lines, as people are saying, more liberalisation. But unfortunately, there are signs of global protectionism from some major economies. And as has already been noted, we have real challenges there to the WTO system. And those challenges are certainly going to be there until the US presidential election. And indeed, even if there were to be a change of administration in the United States, there is going to be a need to talk about WTO reform. So in this circumstance, indeed, CPTPP is the appropriate response, and I think is going to be growing in significance. On the question of Taiwan's eligibility, suitability, I think the fact that Taiwan has been willing to enter into such a high quality free trade agreement as it has with New Zealand and also with Singapore is evidence that it can easily meet the standard. At the time that Taiwan did begin negotiations with New Zealand, the level of protectionism in some sensitive sectors such as agriculture was extremely high. And we now have an agreement which in all but 2 product areas, we have complete free trade already. And in those two very narrow areas, liquid milk and deer velvet, full free trade is going to be achieved within another 4 years. So it's a very major achievement for goods trade, complete free trade, and very good investment and services provisions as well. The New Zealand-Taiwan Free Trade Agreement was negotiated at the same time as TPP, as we then called it, was being negotiated. A number of the chapter leads in the negotiation were the same New Zealand chapter leads who were negotiating the TPP agreement. So there is enormous similarity between the 2 agreements in terms of structure and detail. So I don't think there's any issue around Taiwan being able to meet the standard. I will talk a little bit at the end about some advice for Taiwan. While there is huge enthusiasm, I know, in Taiwan for CPTPP, I don't think that there is any reason why Taiwan should be panicking that it is not yet a member. Indeed, there are some challenges facing CPTPP, which perhaps are best addressed with the existing membership before expansion occurs. Hugh's already identified the fact that we still have 4 members yet to ratify the agreement. There are some issues around whether those that have ratified are faithfully implementing all provisions, particularly around agricultural quota access. There are other challenges. One, for example, is that we wouldn't have CPTPP without the very strong leadership from Japan and from Prime Minister Abe. We're witnessing leadership transition in Japan right now. We're not sure who the new leader is going to be, but I personally am hopeful that there is going to be continuing very strong leadership from Japan for this agreement. And if that does occur, that will be very helpful to the expansion process. I think also there are some questions about whether CPTPP and actually other free trade agreements perhaps do need to be updated with the COVID-19 situation, global pandemic in mind. Maybe we could be actually adding some provisions to these agreements to ensure that we keep those critical supply lines open. In terms of prospective members, aside from Taiwan, I'm watching the UK with enormous interest. They seem to be actually the keenest. And it was very interesting to see at the most recent Commission meeting attitudes to that membership. I think it was very well timed in terms of the Japan-UK free trade agreement, and Japan was able to leverage the prospect of CPTPP membership very well to get some concessions out of the UK in terms of that other negotiation. Thailand has been thinking about this for some time, obviously. The Republic of Korea was also another potential member. Philippines, Indonesia have been talked about. Interestingly, in terms of Latin America, we're not hearing much from Colombia, but in years gone by, there was talk about Colombian membership as well. I would be very surprised if we don't see the first moves to expansion of CPTPP next year at the Commission meeting next year, which I think Japan may be hosting. Now, I thought I might just make some comments about prospective Chinese membership. That certainly caught a lot of people, interested a lot of people here in New Zealand. I, like Hugh, am not so sure that we should be taking that terribly seriously. But I think it's a positive thing that China is talking about CPTPP membership. Certainly New Zealand would be open to talking to China if China is prepared to commit to the disciplines in CPTPP. Indeed, the chapter on state-owned enterprises in CPTPP, as it now stands, was drafted by a group of lawyers in Washington, D.C., headed by the current WTO Deputy Director, Alan Wolf, very much with China in mind. And it would be, I think, a very positive step for the global economy if China were prepared to adopt those disciplines for its SOE sector. So at a superficial level, interest by China in CPTPP is good news. But this isn't totally new news. There have been a number of academics and actually government officials in China who've been talking about potential membership and been very interested in the topic for some time. From a New Zealand perspective, we actually have never seen TPP or CPTPP as an anti-China initiative. We have always been of the view that it is a negotiation and an agreement that should be eventually open to all of APEC and then any economy globally that can meet the standard. The fact that China is showing interest should not be seen as an impossible delivery. But I do wonder whether, in fact, China is being serious at this point in time, or whether it is fomenting mischief. It's quite clear that if the CPTPP membership were confronted with a decision over accepting a Chinese application to begin negotiations, this would be a very, very major decision. It will take some time, I think, for people to make decisions on it. And it's particularly interesting, I think, and it's really good that we have a panel including Canadian and Mexican representatives, because, of course, we have seen a renegotiation of NAFTA. I know you all call it different things depending on where you are. We call it the USCMA here in New Zealand for some reason, USMACA. The new agreement has Article 3210, which on the surface anyway looks as though there is a potential US involvement in any decision about future FTA partners. And it'll be very interesting to see how that played out should China actually apply. We wouldn't be anticipating in New Zealand seeing the United States reapplying quickly for membership of CPTPP. That's unfortunate, but I can't see President Trump, given the positions he's taken, being too positive about this agreement should he be re-elected. And I think it will be a challenge for President Biden, at least in the short term. President Biden was very supportive of TPP when he was Vice President. But I think that it will take some time for the Democrats to determine their trade policy should they be re-elected. So in terms of China, also, I think Japan's attitude is going to be very, very important as well. So I don't think we should be expecting Chinese membership anytime soon. But as I say, it is good that they are interested. I do think that Taiwan should continue to be interested in CPTPP membership. Certainly, well, actually, it wouldn't suit New Zealand for Taiwan to join because we've got a free trade agreement and we're enjoying good tariff preferences over the other potential members of other members of CPTPP. We would not be the problem. We would be very supportive of any economy that can meet the standard being part of the process. We do want to see CPTPP expand. I would recommend Taiwan be lobbying very, very hard, particularly in Tokyo and in capitals such as Canberra and Ottawa. I found Hugh's comments about current tensions between Canada and China very interesting. And as he notes, the fact that there is tension there is maybe not necessarily a good thing in terms of a decision over Taiwan's membership of CPTPP. But on the other hand, it could be interesting in terms of timing. And as we can see, looking across the Tasman at our Australian friends, the relationship with China is extremely tense at this point in time. So I think Taiwan, keep being interested. You're very eligible for membership. And I expect over the medium to long term that Taiwan will be a member of CPTPP, along with a number of economies in the APEC and region and globally. Longer term, I actually see CPTPP with an expanded membership playing a critical role in terms of the issue of WTO reform, and maybe in the very long term, we'll see CPTPP and the EU lead the way for what will be the new World Trade Organization. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. My center actually look at the chapters of the Taiwan-New Zealand FTA, and we realized that many of the chapters, for example, chapters on TBT and SPS issues are actually mimic of the chapter in the CPTPP. So I think it is a great experience for especially Taiwan to prepare ourselves for the future CPTPP membership session. So, but you again raised a very important question, that is China's interest in the CPTPP and what is the implication for everybody, including or especially Taiwan. But we probably will come back to that question later. Let me introduce our last but not least speaker, Mr. Francisco de Rosenvig from Mexico. So Francisco, can you hear me?
Yes,
okay,
thank
good.
you.
Very good, thank you. Francisco is currently the administrative partner of the law firm White and Case in Mexico City. Previously, he has been serving as the Deputy Minister of Foreign Trade at the Ministry of Economy in Mexico. In these two capacities, Francisco has been participating in the TPP negotiation as the Deputy Minister, and also when he joined the White and Case law firm, he also joined the renegotiation of the NAFTA, which is now referred to in the US as the USMCA. In Canada, I understand it's CUSMA. I don't know what's the name in Mexico, but probably Francisco, you will share with us. So I'll invite you to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. It's a great pleasure to be today with you all. Again, I really appreciate this kind of invitation, and it's an honor to be with my colleagues at this panel. In Mexico, the USMCA is called TEMEC. In Canada, I guess, is CUSMA, and in the US is USMCA. So that was the latest trade negotiation that Mexico was part of. But as you mentioned, I had the privilege to be the Deputy Minister for Foreign Trade during the process while Mexico joined the TPP back then, since the first time when we knocked the door of the TPP 9, while also Canada a bit later also expressed their intent to join the initiative, and at the end was Japan who joined the initiative. It's a great negotiation, great outcome, and I would like to provide some views as a former trade negotiator in order to add some value to the discussion and not being repetitive about the very clear messages that my colleague already shared to you. I do believe that something that is very important to bear in mind is that since the US withdrew from TPP, we're talking about a whole new different game. And the truth is that this is the first initiative or trade initiative that was with the main purpose to have a linkage between within the Asia-Pacific rim. So nowadays, in my view, there is a great need for an expansion of CPTPP. I fully agree. The leadership that Japan has over the last few years has been very positive and bold. And in my view, what Taiwan has done in the case of Mexico is the appropriate approach, because they have been engaging with the Mexican stakeholders, have been trying to strengthen the bilateral ties, not only with Mexico, but with all CPTP members. It's important to bear in mind that TPP was born under the APEC umbrella or platform. So Taiwan is part of this initiative, as it is also of the WTO. So having said that, I remember while we were negotiating the TPP, several countries that expressed their intention to join this initiative, even China, I remember well, was just a couple of weeks before the president of China was coming to Mexico. And at the end, there's been some countries that I don't want to mention, all of you already know. But at the end, I guess that the political will that Taiwan has expressed and mentioned over the last few months is critical. And it's critical because when we talk about TPP, we're talking about a level of ambition that is not easy to meet. And I'm aware of the great efforts that Taiwan has been doing within their domestic regulations in order to prepare for this trade platform. Having said that, it's very important to bear in mind that when you want to join a plurilateral platform, you need to have the support in advance of the different members of any trade initiative, no? As it is the CPTPP. So in my view, what is important to bear in mind is the wide disciplines that include this trade initiative. And I remember well that when we expressed formally within the G20 summit back in 2011 in Mexico, President Obama welcomed us as candidates. And since then, it started the long road of negotiation that ended on February 4, 2016. And nowadays, any new party that wants to join the CPTPP will have to bear in mind that they will have to meet and somehow adhere to the disciplines that were negotiated, with the exception of trading goods and rule of origin. So this is something where every member of the CPP will have something to say. In the case of Mexico, we're lucky because with Taiwan we don't have any sensitivities. We have complementary trading goods. And also, Mexico is taking advantage of the technology that the Taiwanese industry has been developing. So I will say that having said all of this, what is important maybe is to pay attention to the trading goods, because this is something that every member or existing member of the CPTPP will devote time. And once that this process is done, then the next stage is, I will say, quite simple. But to arrive to that stage, it's a matter of process of having a dialogue with each of the members. And for this exercise or purpose, it's very important to have the support of Japan or Mexico or any of the let's say relevant players in terms of GDP within the initiative. It's true that within the membership nowadays, at least under the Mexican presidency pro tempore of the CPTPP, one of the main objectives is to have the possibility to have the CPTPP fully implemented by the end of the year. This is not something that relies only under the Mexican presidency. It requires, of course, the support of the four members that are still, or they have still ongoing processes, to conclude their domestic authorizations. And then the discussion goes about the expansion. The economy or party that somehow has been more straightforward about their intent to join the initiative recently is the UK. And UK nowadays with the Brexit is like seeing different opportunities, and it will be very interesting to have a country that is located in the Atlantic that will join a initiative that is somehow addressed for the Asia-Pacific region. But having said that, in the case of Taiwan, I will say that my view is that they are doing very clever approaches, talking to the parties that somehow have an ally in that effort. But not only that, as I said, also meeting the level of ambition that the different disciplines that the CPTPP are considered. In my view, something that is important is not only to think about some other third parties that would like to join this initiative. I think that is a matter of talking to each of the members and just showing the commitment to meet the level of ambition. As I mentioned, I'm clearly convinced that in the short run, the CPTPP will need to be expanded because without having the US, the truth is that the benefits for the platform are quite lower. And having Taiwan, among other economies, as a part of this initiative will enrich the platform. But not only that, also the ties between the Asia-Pacific rim. So those will be like my general remarks. I'm happy to have a further discussion.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Now, after hearing four wonderful and insightful presentations, we are now in the Q&A session. I know there are a lot of questions from the floor. I have personally write down a few questions as well, but I'm not going to abuse my privilege as the moderator. I'm going to open the question to the floor and to collect a few questions before we invite our panelists to provide their comments or answers. And also, I would like to invite our four panelists to offer your views or comments on the presentation that you heard from other panelists in the last an hour or so. Rui, you want to say something first? Please, you take the floor.
Just while you are, while we are waiting for the questions from the panel, I would like to respond a couple of the points raised by the great friend panelists. And first of all, thank you very much for very warm words to Prime Minister Abe and Japanese leadership. It was very, I think on our side, very strong commitment and then strong determination to make the TPP-11 happen when we face a situation where the US, who was the initiator originally, withdrew. And also for the Prime Minister Abe was very much working hard on this TPP, CPTPP, TPP-11 we call in Japan. Because then in that regard, I would like to mention that Japan and our friends, member friends, worked hard to make a framework where the US, once decided, can come back anytime So that is a setting for the present TPP. So I think with any changes minds on the US side, I think inclusion of the US makes the TPP hugely more beneficial. So that's one thing. And then Japan is ready, prepared to exercise our leadership. Even though the Prime Minister Abe, unfortunately, I'm very sad that he just created his prime ministership because of the avoidable situation. But Japan is committed to continue to exercise our leadership to make the TPP level more fruitful and including the expansion of the membership and then also the contents of the agreements. And that's one thing. And in that regard, also, I would like to take this opportunity to pay my sincere condolence for former President Lee Teng-hui. He was founder of the Taiwan democracy and also the real promoter of Japan-Taiwan relationship. And all the Japanese people, I do say, feel and think Taiwan is a real friend. You know, you see the friendship at the time in need. And Taiwan has been very, very friendly and also supportive when Japan is in difficult situations, including the East Baton earthquake and also the coronavirus crisis. And so with that regards, I stop here. Just to the last question on China question. I think now that after we see the present, let's face it, we are seeing like U.S.-China hegemonic struggle and also very difficult protectionist trend. And then now that TPP itself is economic framework, but I think you need to have the trust among member countries that this member is committed to what we believe. And I think there are certain political questions in this regard, in any framework actually. So I think when when China is very aggressive in the South China Sea or like coming over to our territory, over Senkaku Islands, I think that affects our decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy. I would like to invite the floor to take raise questions. Please identify yourself and also your affiliation, and please keep your question in a concise way. So that gentleman, please.
My name is Bill Sharp, and I'm a visiting scholar on the strength of the Taiwan Fellowship at National Taiwan University. My perception is, rightly or wrongly, that if China is a member of the CPTPP, that it will block Taiwan's admission. If it is not a member of the CPTPP, it will put pressure on other countries to block Taiwan's impression. So I'd like to know the respondents' view on that.
Okay, shall we collect the second question from Lady Professor? Sorry, can we have the microphone over there? Professor Chiu. So the first question is about China's blocking with or without TPP membership. I saw Charles is ready to answer, but let's collect a next question before I invite you to comment on that. Professor Chiu, please.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Honorable Masukawa. And Japan is undergoing the transition of choosing the new leader. Do you have any inside information? That's not my real question. My real question is, should Taiwan be prepared for changing tone or approach between Japan-Taiwan relations under the new leader? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chiu. So, Charles, you will take the floor about the China blocking issue.
Well, you can argue this many ways, but I was very heavily involved in the processes around accessions to WTO and to APEC, and you could make an argument that China wanting to join would mean that we could follow the same formula for Taiwan. I basically am of the view that China is not yet ready for CPTPP membership. Taiwan is, and any interest that China is expressing is probably for tactical reasons at this point in time, as opposed to very serious reasons. So I really just don't see China at this point in time being ahead of Taiwan in the queue. But I think all of us are going to have to manage the relationship with China in terms of any decision on beginning negotiations with Taiwan, and that is why Taiwan has to be working very hard in all capital cities to encourage support, and we're going to all have to adopt a very sophisticated approach should China be trying to block this. I don't think that China does have a right of veto on this, but it will be a factor.
Is there anyone else want to answer? Oh, before that, Hugh, you have the floor. Sorry, Hugh, we have a technical problem, so we cannot hear your voice. Just let me sort out this problem. Can you hear me from Taipei audience?
Can you hear me now?
Okay, now we are working. Please take
Okay,
the floor.
fine, thank you. Yeah, I was going to say, I think one has to be careful how one, in effect, gives permission to China to set itself up as the arbiter of who can and who cannot join an agreement to which it's thought itself a party. And this has always been an issue in Canada. One is not going to ask China whether they agree or they disagree. It's sort of a question almost of self-censorship. What might China think? What might China do? And that's why I think the time is propitious to move ahead in regard to two things. First of all, the China factor is less in terms of direct bilateral relations, but I think also in terms of other members of the CPTPP. So I think that's one factor. And the second is that this is presumably going to be an accession in which there are going to be several partners. So this is not just a question of Taiwan joining. This is going to be an expansion of the CPP to include other regional economies, strengthening international supply chains and so forth. And I think by, in a sense, modifying the question, desensitizing it to some extent by broadening it, I think this is the way to move forward. It's going to be a sensitive question. I fully agree with Charles that China or any other country shouldn't have a veto over whether another WTO member can join a regional agreement. And I think that's an important principle that the existing members will have to adhere to. But now does seem to present an opportunity, both because of the need to recover from post-COVID, because the fact that the agreement is ready to take on more than one partner, and frankly, because of the existing geopolitical situation.
I also want to add a quick footnote before I turn the floor to Roy. China has been very consistent about blocking Taiwan. There's no doubt about that. China took the same position in the last 40 years, and probably in the next 40 years. But the world is different. So the effectiveness of Chinese blocking, of Taiwan's participation in regional economic integration might have different outcome in the near future. Now, in the last 20, 30 years, everybody's looking at the Chinese growing economy, the growing middle class, a lucrative domestic demand market. But now, most countries are rethinking about this strategy, rethinking about this approach. So I think, yes, China will continue to block, but the world is different. So we'll see. My guess is China's blocking will become less effective. And as Charles and Hugh has mentioned, this veto power is not something that we would like to see, especially in an economic integration process. But sorry, Roy, can you share with us any insight, information about the future leadership of Japan?
Thank you for the question. And then also, I'm really thankful for the very high attention to the Japanese election for actually, technically speaking, it's the presidency of the present ruling party, Liberal Democratic Party, but it's de facto basis the next Prime Minister of Japan. So thank you for the attention. And well, I cannot really share that, the internal secretive information. But let me share that now that the three candidates for this presidency is underway, and then we will see the results on the 14th of September, which means it's only like how many days to go? 4 days to go. So you'll see soon. But I'm very much convinced that the continuation of the Prime Minister Abe's important policies as to TPP or like economic policy and also the diplomacy basic. Our basic diplomatic and also our security principle will not change. It remains like we're committed to the Japan-US security alliance and then also like our Indo-Pacific network. We call it Indo-Pacific strategy, and liberal democratic order especially in the economic framework. And then the TPP 11 is the products of our friendly members' achievement and led by, I think, if I may fair to say, the Japanese leadership. And so including the expansion question or like who will be the membership question, I think the members work together and then Japanese new prime minister will play healthy, constructive leadership. That's I committed. And what was that? Oh, and the next question on the on Taiwan policy, Japanese policy vis-a-vis Taiwan. I think it will remain the same. We are committed to the. I don't think we will commit to the one China policy that I think described by the Canadian panelists and I think Charles. The same. I think it's going to be the same. But if you look at the how we exercise that, that will be affected by geopolitical situation, of course. And I think I would say that Taiwan, a maritime nation, we are on what China calls on the first island chain, and we share many the values and the strategic interests together. Well, I'm talking about the geopolitics, but that affects in many areas, including I think the economic areas too. Thank you.
Thank you. We still have time to take maybe 2 rounds of questions. So I saw 2 hands raised. So Mr. Gu at the front, the lady, you will be taking the next question. Please.
Good morning. My name is Gu, Director General of Department Policy Planning of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would like to echo what Hughes you have mentioned. Actually, in terms of CPTPP, nowadays we need a partner, so-called ROC partner. ROC means not Republic of China, Taiwan. ROC means reliable, open, and constructive. If I could, of course, I would like plus one more T. T means attraction. And ladies and gentlemen, you know, nowadays, because this morning we heard that, some of you think about that, maybe you could deal with the PRC to talk their participant in CPTPP. But you know, nowadays, PRC use a way in political side, we know, all of us, we know that they use a way so-called soft power. And soft power, yesterday we talked about many times about soft power. And this soft power, we can use 3 simple terms. Number 1 is coercive. Number 2, covert. Number 3, corrupt. And in political way, they use these terms to disrupt and so on. And economically, they use a way so-called predatory. Ladies and gentlemen, do you think such a country could be a partner for our CPTPP? You think about that? Please rethink. Please rethink again. And that is what I want to echo our Hughes you have mentioned. Thank you.
Charles, I think that question is for you, but I'll come back to you later. please rethink in the next 20 seconds. I'll take the question from the lady at the back. So one more question, then I'll come to you. Microphone? Can we have a microphone? That lady in the last row. And also, I have a quick question for everybody. CPTP came into force almost 2 years now, and the protocol of accession is already available. Why there's no new membership applying? So, and is there any obstacles within the CPTP group that is preventing new membership to apply? So, but I'll come back if there's time, right? So please.
Actually, I think my question's just been answered, so I'm okay. I think my question's just been answered, so I'm okay. Jane Rickards with The Economist, thanks.
Okay, no problem. So the lady at the back who is raising hands say that her question has been already answered. So can we come back to this China potential participation issue? Mr. Gu from MOFA argues that China being a not so like-minded country with the value and the vision shared by current CPTP member, is that possible or appropriate for CPTP to consider China just based on economic merits to join the CPTPP? So Charles, you want to go first? But I will just go around as other people. And Francisco, you'll be next. Or Charles, you need time to think? Or?
No.
Okay, please go ahead.
I'm ready to go. Well, New Zealand also has a very high standard free trade agreement with China, which has delivered major economic benefits to our economy. For many players here in New Zealand, China is by far the most important economic partner now for us. And so we try and focus on these agreements as being trade and economic agreements and put politics a little bit to one side. We've never seen TPP as a political agreement. I know that it is portrayed by some parties as such, but we reject that in New Zealand. But on the question of soft power, I'm sure this is true elsewhere in the region, but here in New Zealand, not a day goes by without there being very positive comment on Taiwan, mainly in terms of response to COVID-19, but increasingly people are focusing on Taiwan's democracy, Taiwan as a bit of a beacon of hope in terms of having a free press and independent judiciary. And this is really impacted in terms of focuses on the World Health Organization, World Health Assembly, institutions such as the International Civil Aviation Organization. There is a lot of very, very positive comment and respect for Taiwan right now. And I think Taiwan should be thinking about how to leverage it. A lot of people are saying very nice things about our country as well in terms of response to COVID-19. And we're certainly thinking very, very hard about how to leverage that appropriately. But I think as people are, I think Hugh has made this point already, attitudes to Taiwan are perhaps changing, and that will, I think, can only be positive in terms of decisions to be taken about potential CPTPP membership. If you wanted me to answer very quickly why no one else has joined CPTPP, I think it is because we still haven't got everyone that has been a member ratifying, and people are just watching to see that ratification occur. And there have been some domestic challenges in Thailand and elsewhere in terms of attitudes to liberalisation, which have to be worked through.
Thank you, Charles. And Francisco, please.
Thank you. Well, in my experience, I think that the views about China in the sense that they do not have a veto right. In my view, what is important is to pay attention and devote all the bilateral efforts with each of the CPTPP members. It's true that maybe some of them may face some political pressure from China, but at the end, if you put on the table the benefits that the intent of Taiwan to join the CPTPP platform will provide, I think this is something that each member will consider heavily. On the other hand, I would say that one of the reasons why it's important to move forward for Taiwan nowadays is about the work that has done so far with different members, because any third party that wants to join CPTPP will have to follow the same procedure and the same path. So if you are ahead in this process, you have will in better shape in order to meet the standards and to be accepted and be part of a platform as the CPTPP. Talking about the expansion or why there's no new members within the membership, I will say that maybe we're missing a couple of issues at least. The first one is that while the negotiation took place for CPTPP, everybody was in love with free trade. Since the Trump administration and some other governments or regions, free trade is not so popular lately, no? So also between some of the members that are part of CPTPP are having some domestic issues not related essentially to trade, such as Chile or Peru, that in the case of Mexico or the region, Chile has been free trade. And so far they have not been able to conclude their domestic procedures. So I would say that this is something that is important to bear in mind. Second, the initiative has not been fully implemented. So there is an ongoing between members if they need to have the initiative fully implemented before expanding it, or if they can do both to cover both issues on parallel tracks. No? And the third one is that there are some countries that over the years have expressed their intent, but there were some intent in the media, but maybe not real intent in terms of meeting and having bilateral talks with each of the CPTPP members. No? So I guess those will be my views regarding the queries that you were asked.
Thank you. Before we wrap up, first of all, I would like to invite our 4 panelists to continue your support for Taiwan to apply for TPP membership. I think that creates not the value only for Taiwan, but for everybody else on that network. So please continue your positive understanding and support. And secondly, I would like to invite all panelists to offer perhaps just one tip to facilitate Taiwan's preparedness for the CPTPP. Just if you are invited to offer just one tip, what will be that for Taiwan? So Hugh, would you like to go first about this one tip?
Thank you. The point was made about Taiwan's international reputation. I think it's being greatly enhanced because of COVID, but also because of the exercise of democracy and its willingness to open its economy. So I think, stay on message and continue to execute in terms of values and pass the message and continue to work with like-minded partners within the CPTPP. And I'm convinced that this will come to fruition in the sooner rather than the later future.
Thank you, Hugh. Next, I would like to invite Roy to offer your one tip for Taiwan's CPTPP application. Sorry, we can't hear you now. Okay, now we're good.
Thank you. Thank you. I echo with Hugh. Taiwan has proven a very, this time, Corona time, I think best, I think, countries that overcome their crisis, and then democracy, and led by a great leader, President Tsai Ing-wen, who is, I think, a real successor of the Lee Dam-hui. I think it's a good opportunity. I think the Taiwan is at the windows of opportunity. So I continue to be great in value and also the openness. And also Taiwan should be proud of the digital economy. I think that you have the very good companies, which is a world-leading company that can compete with the US top companies or like Chinese Huawei. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to invite Charles for your tip for Taiwan.
I'm going to cheat and give you 2 tips. First, there are a number of interesting regional plurilateral agreements that have sprung up since COVID-19 around the supply of critical goods and medicines, and also on digital trade. And I would recommend Taiwan work very hard to join those agreements. But most importantly, keep buying lots of New Zealand goods, particularly agricultural products. It will put enormous pressure on the Australians and Canadians, so they'll be even keener to support Taiwanese membership of CPTPP.
Charles, we do have a increased number of New Zealand apples, kiwi, and lovely wines from New Zealand, so we'll drink more. And Francisco, please.
Thank you. In my view, I think that what is important is to have a close approach and dialogue with Japan as being the most relevant CPTPP member in the sense of the leadership. And second, to approach the different constituencies of each of the CPTPP members. I think that talking to stakeholders and showing the benefits of having on board Taiwan will make the difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Thank you very much for this lovely 90-minute discussion on CPTPP, especially on recommendations for Taiwan. And also, thank you very much for the audience for participating and raising good questions about this issue. So I have nothing to add, but to conclude this session by inviting our audience to thank our panelists again for their wonderful sharing and presentation. Thank you very much, and this session is adjourned now. Thank you. See you.
Yeah.